Well, I see it's time for me to tell you another spine-tingling tale, one of my vast collection of chillers, which I keep here in the crypt. This story is a favorite of mine, one that I guarantee will make your blood run cold and your hair stand on end. I call it The Thing from the Sea. You are about to begin a frightful adventure concerning a luxurious ocean liner and the strange and unexplained events that will occur in Stateroom 13. It was a bitter, gray morning on the New York docks, the kind of morning where the mist rolls in thick as ghosts and every ship's whistle sounds like a cry from the dead. The crowd was restless, clutching their tickets, desperate to leave America's shore behind for the promise of England. But one man pushed through, a tall figure in a red fedora, eyes sharp with urgency. He wasn't here for leisure or luxury. This was a man on the run. You could see it in his face, that look of someone haunted by something he couldn't leave behind. He cornered the ship's purser near the gangway of the Ocean Queen, pleading for a cabin, any cabin. The purser hesitated, glancing toward the vessel, then back at him, lowering his voice. There was one berth left, a room no one else would take, a stateroom with a reputation, a stateroom numbered 13. And so begins our tale, dear listener, a voyage across the sea, where fate and fear share the same cabin key. Heh 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 heh. What luck! Or was it fate? Only one berth remained in Stateroom 13. The man barely paused to think. He paid the purser and hurried up the gangway, his ticket trembling in his hand like a guilty secret. Behind him, the dock workers shouted their last commands. Cast off the forward lines! Make ready for departure! While families on the pier waved their final goodbyes through the mist. He reached the top of the gangplank just as the ship's horn let out a long, mournful cry, a sound that rattled the air like the groan of something ancient waking from the deep. The Ocean Queen began to drift away from the pier, her hull slicing through the harbor water like a blade through black silk. The man looked back only once, toward the city, shrinking behind the fog, before turning his eyes toward the endless sea. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he stepped aboard, his journey had already crossed into darker waters. Oh, you can feel it too, can't you? The chill in the air, the whisper beneath the waves. Something's waiting for him in Stateroom 13. The dock slipped away beneath a blanket of fog as the Ocean Queen eased into midstream. Tugboats strained against the current, their engines groaning as they guided the liner toward open water. Crowds on shore blurred into the distance, faces, voices, and memories fading beneath the mist. On deck, the traveler finally exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing as the city disappeared behind him. He'd made it aboard. For now, at least, he was safe. A steward approached with a polite smile, his white uniform spotless against the gray sky. "May I take your bags, sir?" The man nodded, forcing a brief smile. "Thank you." As the steward led him toward the interior corridors, the traveler couldn't shake the feeling that the air had grown colder, as though the sea itself were watching him depart. What he didn't yet know was that every voyage has its price, and this one was already paid in full. The steward led him below deck, the corridor narrowing as they went, walls lined with polished brass and flickering light from the portholes. The air smelled faintly of salt and varnish, and somewhere deep in the ship, machinery throbbed like a heartbeat. They spoke little as they walked, their footsteps syncing with the rhythm of the waves. The steward broke the silence first, his voice casual, but his eyes avoiding the passengers. "Ah, what number stateroom do you have, sir?" The man pulled the ticket from his coat pocket, squinting at the print. "Why, 13. For a moment, the steward's polite smile faltered. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but there. He nodded quickly, his tone suddenly brisk. "Right this way, sir." As they moved deeper into the hallway, the ship gave a low groan, like something stirring within its hull. And with every step closer to stateroom 13, the temperature seemed to drop. They stopped outside the cabin door, brass numbers glinting faintly under the dim lights. The steward hesitated, his hand halfway to the handle. For the first time, his cheerful composure slipped. His face went pale, his eyes darting from the door to the man beside him, as if he'd just remembered something he wished he could forget. The passenger noticed immediately. "What's the matter, steward?" he asked. The man stammered, his voice unsteady. "Oh, nothing, sir. Nothing at all." He forced a thin smile, but his hand trembled as he turned the key. The color drained from his cheeks. The sound of the lock clicking open echoed louder than it should have, like the final note of a warning unheeded. Some doors should never be opened. The steward set the bags down carefully, his movements slower now, cautious, like a man handling something fragile or cursed. He checked the porthole, twisting the bolts to be sure it was locked tight. Then he turned, his face pale under the dim cabin light. His eyes darted toward the door, as if he couldn't bear to stay another moment inside. The passenger frowned. "What is it, old man? What about this cabin frightens you?" The steward hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. I don't know," he murmured, "only that something here isn't right." His gaze lingered on the shadows pooling near the corners of the room, as though something unseen was breathing there. He stepped backward, one trembling hand still on the door frame. And for a moment, you could swear he was listening, not to you, but to something else. Whatever it was, the steward didn't wait to find out. The steward hesitated at the doorway, his voice lowered now, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "No one who's ever stayed in this cabin," he began, his tone unsteady, "has ever completed the voyage." The passenger frowned. "What are you saying?" "Something in this room," the steward whispered. "Something or someone. It frightens them, drives them out before the ship reaches port." He swallowed hard, eyes flicking toward the bolted porthole. "One man lost his mind here. The doctor said it was exhaustion, but the way he screamed." The passenger took a step closer. "What did they see?" The steward looked up, his face drawn and pale. "I don't know," he murmured, "but it's waiting." Outside, the fog thickened, and somewhere below deck, the ocean whispered against the hull like a voice trying to be heard. The steward mumbled something about ghosts before slipping from his grasp. He didn't look back, just hurried down the corridor, his footsteps fading into the distance. The passenger stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, the silence pressing in. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Ghosts," he muttered under his breath. "Nonsense. Probably some silly sailor's tale. Suggestion and nerves. That's all." He turned back into the cabin, forcing a small laugh to steady himself. The warm lamplight flickered across the walls, chasing away the darker corners. But not entirely. He told himself it was all superstition. Yet somewhere deep inside, a seed of unease had already taken root. He unpacked slowly, placing his belongings into the small drawers beside the berth. The cabin was modest, 1 porthole, 2 bunks, and the faint smell of sea salt clinging to the air. The ship's motion was gentle, almost soothing, and for a moment he allowed himself to relax. He glanced at the luggage resting on the other bed, neat, untouched. So, he murmured, someone else is sharing the room. Probably still up on deck saying goodbye to the good old USA. He smiled faintly at the thought, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something about the stillness of the cabin, something too quiet that made the air feel heavier than it should. 2 berths, but only 1 occupied, for now. After dinner, the hum of conversation faded behind him. The passenger returned to his cabin, the steady rhythm of the engines beneath his feet almost comforting. The sea air had left him tired, a little drowsy. When he opened the door, he stopped short. Someone was there, a man unpacking a suitcase on the lower berth. The stranger turned and smiled, extending a hand. "Oh, hello. I guess you must be my roommate. Glad to meet you." The passenger nodded, relaxing slightly. "Same here. Rather small stateroom, isn't it? Had to take it. Only 1 left." The man chuckled, though it didn't sound entirely natural. His eyes flicked toward the porthole for just a moment too long before returning to his unpacking. 2 men now shared the cabin, but the room somehow felt smaller, as if the walls had quietly drawn closer around them. The 2 men talked for a while, swapping polite words about the voyage, the weather, and the sea. But beneath the conversation, something restless stirred, an unspoken thought they both seemed to share. The passenger shrugged off his coat, fatigue finally catching up with him. "Well," he said lightly, "guess I'll turn in. I'm pretty tired." His new roommate nodded from the lower bunk, closing the book he'd been pretending to read. "Me too," he said. "Glad you're here, though. The steward told me some strange things about this room." The man paused mid-motion, hand still on the lamp. "Strange?" The other gave a faint, uneasy laugh. "Just old sailor talk, I suppose. You know, ghosts, bad luck, that sort of thing." They both laughed, but only one of them meant it. And as the lights dimmed, the cabin seemed to grow colder. The 2 men finished their conversation, each pretending to laugh off the steward's strange warnings. The air in the cabin had grown still, too still. The younger man loosened his collar and sat on the edge of his berth, the lamplight flickering against the porthole glass. "Oh, I wouldn't take it seriously," his roommate said from the upper bunk, smiling faintly. "He's probably just pulling your leg." The man nodded, forcing a smile of his own. "Yes, well, good night." The cabin darkened, save for the pale reflection of the moon through the porthole. The sound of the ship's engines filled the room, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the dark. They drifted toward sleep, both trying to believe that nothing waited beyond the walls of Stateroom 13. But belief is a fragile thing. You don't know how long you've been asleep, only that something feels wrong. A cold draft brushes your face, carrying the smell of the sea, dampness, salt, and something else, something stale, like decay. You open your eyes. The room feels colder now. The sheets are damp against your skin. Then you hear it, a faint rattle, like glass shifting in the wind. You turn toward the porthole, and your stomach tightens. It's open. A gush of night air rushes through, carrying with it the chill of the ocean. You sit up, muttering to yourself, Blast, the porthole's open. I'd better close it or risk a nasty cold. But as you move toward it, the air feels heavier, the smell stronger, almost as if something had just been here. The wind stung his face as he stumbled toward the open porthole. The bolts had come loose, and the fine mist of seawater sprayed across the cabin floor. He reached out, gripping the cold metal frame. The air smelled of salt and rust and something else, something foul. He forced it closed, bolting it hard. There, he muttered, that should hold. For a moment, all was still. Only the thrum of the ship's engines filled the silence. Then, a blood-curdling scream tore through the darkness. He froze, heart hammering in his chest, eyes snapping upward toward the upper berth. "What the?" he whispered. Something had screamed, but whether it was human, he couldn't yet tell. Before he could speak again, the man in the upper bunk jolted upright, his eyes wide, fixed on something unseen. With a single desperate leap, he sprang from the berth to the floor. His breath came in sharp bursts, his face pale as chalk. The other man reached out instinctively. "What is it? What's wrong?" But the roommate didn't answer. He tore across the small room, panic burning in his eyes, like he was trying to escape something only he could see. There was no reasoning in his eyes now, only terror. Something had gripped him, something beyond fear. He listened as the footsteps faded, running, stumbling, disappearing somewhere deep in the ship. Poor old fellow, he thought, probably seasick. He shut the cabin door and leaned against it for a moment, catching his breath. The silence returned, heavy and thick. Slowly, he made his way back to his berth and pulled the blanket over his shoulders. Sleep came again, uneasy and shallow, but in the early hours of morning, something stirred, a sound. His eyes opened. He lay still, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. He frowned. Not a very good sailor, poor chap, he muttered to himself. Listen to him moan. But the sound didn't come from the hallway. It came from the berth above. Morning came too soon. The sunlight streaming through the porthole broke the gray stillness of the night. He blinked against the light, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and for a moment wondered if it had all been a dream. The air smelled different now, less of sea and steel, more of stale dampness. His head ached faintly. He sat up slowly, glancing toward the upper bunk. The curtains were drawn tight. No sound, no movement. He smiled faintly, forcing levity. "Probably isn't in the mood for breakfast anyway," he muttered, slipping on his coat. Without disturbing his roommate, he opened the cabin door and stepped into the corridor. The air outside felt fresher, but colder somehow. He didn't notice the faint drip echoing from the porthole or the thin trickle of seawater that traced its way across the floor beneath the berth. The morning air felt fresher on deck. The sunlight shimmered over the waves, bright, almost too bright. For the first time since boarding, he let himself breathe freely. But the calm didn't last long. A voice called out from behind him, steady, professional, but carrying a hint of something darker. "Excuse me," the ship's doctor said. "I wonder if you can tell me what happened last night. We found your roommate, cowering in one of the passages, babbling like an idiot." He turned sharply. "What? You mean he didn't come back to the stateroom?" The doctor's eyes flickered. He hesitated. "No," he said quietly. "He never did." And in that moment, The sunlight didn't seem so warm anymore. The doctor's words hit you like a cold gust of ocean air. Your roommate, found wandering the corridors in the middle of the night, eyes wide with terror, muttering nonsense. You can see the tension etched on the doctor's face. A man who's seen too much, yet refuses to say what he's thinking. You ask what could have caused such madness, but he just shakes his head. There's no explanation, only fear. As he walks away, you glance back toward the horizon. The sun glimmers across the water, calm and endless. But somewhere deep inside, you can't shake the feeling that something on this ship is watching you. The morning air felt cool and sharp on the deck. The sunlight danced across the waves, but the weight of the doctor's words still clung to my mind. My roommate, found babbling like a madman in the dark corridors. Whatever he'd seen, it had broken something inside him. The ship's doctor studied me for a moment before finally speaking. He said he had a larger cabin and that I should move my things and stay with him for the rest of the trip. I tried to laugh it off, asking if he was really saying the stories about Stateroom 13 were true. But he didn't smile. He just looked away, the corners of his mouth tightening. He told me the man was in shock, real, physical shock, and that maybe it was best I didn't sleep in that cabin again. I nodded, pretending to agree, but inside, I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my spine. There was something about his voice, the way he said it, like he knew more than he wanted to tell. As I turned to head below deck, I caught the faintest scent of salt and dampness in the air. It shouldn't have been there, not this far up on the ship. The doctor's concern lingered in the back of my mind, but I brushed it off with a laugh. I wasn't about to let a silly superstition ruin a perfectly good voyage. The rest of the day passed in comfort and ease. I spent the morning stretched out in a deck chair, letting the sun soak through the sea breeze. In the afternoon, I swam a few lazy laps in the ship's pool and even joined a card game in the lounge after dinner. For the first time since boarding, I almost forgot about Stateroom 13. Almost. By the time I returned to my room, it was late. The corridors were empty and silent. I loosened my tie, stifled a yawn, and glanced at the berth. It looked inviting, warm, harmless, and yet something about the way the shadows pooled in the corners made me hesitate. I told myself it was nothing, just the mind playing tricks after a long day. I was tired, too tired to think. Lying back in my berth, I stared at the ceiling, the events of the night before still playing in my head. The scream, that terrible human sound. It echoed in the dark corners of my thoughts, no matter how hard I tried to forget it. Before settling in, I'd checked the porthole, made sure it was bolted tight. But now, something felt off. The air in the cabin was heavy, damp, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of seawater and something else, something rotten. I turned my head toward the wall and froze. The porthole was open again. A thin trail of water slid down the metal, glinting in the faint light from the corridor. The smell of decay filled the air. Someone or something had opened it. The cabin was cold and damp, the smell of salt heavy in the air. I slammed the porthole shut, my hands shaking as I turned the bolts tight, tighter than before. I knew I'd locked it earlier. I was sure I had. I stood there for a while, staring out at the endless stretch of black ocean through the glass. The water rippled silver under the moonlight, silent and still. Only the faint groan of the ship echoed through the metal walls, like the vessel itself was uneasy. Then I heard it, At first, it was soft, almost like the ship settling, but then it came again, longer, wetter, more human, a low, drawn-out sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. A moan. It drifted down from the darkness above me, from behind the red curtains of the upper berth. I held my breath, staring at the bunk. The curtains moved. Just barely, like something inside had shifted. And then came another sound. Faint, broken, somewhere between a groan and a whisper, like the voice of someone struggling to breathe. The air grew colder. The smell of seawater thickened. And for the first time since I boarded the ship, I began to wonder if the doctor had been right. You spring toward the berth and rip the curtains apart, your hand trembling as you reach into the darkness, searching. The smell hits you first. Thick, foul, rotting seawater and decay. Your stomach turns as your fingers brush against something cold, slick. And then a horrific, gurgling moan fills the air, like drowning lungs trying to breathe again. You grip something cold, something wet, icy to the touch. It feels like a man's arm. Your breath catches in your throat as you pull, and from the berth above, it lunges forward. A shapeless, slimy, dripping mass slams into the cabin floor with a grotesque sucking sound. Its body glistens in the dim light, globs of seaweed clinging to rotted flesh, water cascading down like it just crawled from the depths. The air fills with the sickly stench of salt and decay. You stagger backward, shouting, "Keep away! Keep away!" A wet, dragging hiss fills the room as the creature shifts, its form twitching and bubbling in unnatural movement. In an instant, the horrible monstrosity darts out of the stateroom door, a dripping, ghostly shape gliding through the corridor. Its movements are unnatural, almost fluid, like the sea itself had taken human form. Water streams from its shredded ooze-covered frame, leaving a slick trail behind. The cabin light flickers as it passes, and the air turns bitterly cold. You gasp, heart pounding. Good Lord, so that's what it is. You hesitate for only a moment, then whisper to yourself, "I'll follow it." The sound of sloshing water echoes faintly down the passage, each step pulling you closer to the unknown. You chase the dark shadow through the dimly lit passage, boots echoing against the metal deck. The creature moves fast, unnaturally fast, dragging streams of water that glisten in the flickering light. It slithers toward the companionway, its outline barely visible except for the sickly shimmer of its wet form. You gasp for breath, heart racing, and mutter through clenched teeth, "Blasted thing, it's getting away." The sound of dripping water fades upward as you reach the stairwell. The air now colder, heavier, filled with the stench of the sea and something else, something dead. You stop dead at the top of the companionway, your breath ragged, eyes wide in disbelief. The creature slides over the rail, its dripping form vanishing into the dark sea below with a faint splash. The waves churn briefly, and then silence. Only the sound of the wind and the groaning of the ship remain. You stand there trembling, staring at the spot where it disappeared. Your mind reels. None of it feels real. You whisper to yourself, "I must be dreaming. That cursed meal tonight, it didn't agree with me." But deep down, you know it wasn't the food. The smell of salt and decay still lingers. And somewhere far below the waves, something stirs. You cannot bring yourself to return to that horrible room. The rest of the night you pace the deck in silence, the cold sea air biting against your skin. Finally, exhaustion claims you, and you curl up in a deck chair beneath a steamer blanket, the ship's slow rocking lulling you into a merciful, dreamless sleep. When morning comes, sunlight pierces your eyelids. You squint, momentarily disoriented, until a firm hand shakes your shoulder. You blink up into the face of the ship's captain. "Oh, it's you, Captain." His tone is sharp but concerned. "I went to your stateroom. You weren't there." "Is anything wrong?" You pause, unable to form the truth. The memory of the dripping horror still clings to you like salt water. "I explained everything to the captain, or at least everything I could explain. Something very horrible had happened in my stateroom last night. It might have been my imagination, but the memory still clung to me like cold fog." "Well," said the captain, "why don't you let me fix you up in the officers' quarters for the remainder of the trip?" I hesitated. There was something reassuring in his voice, but also something that told me he already knew there was more to Stateroom 13 than just a bad dream. Later that morning, I met with the captain in his quarters. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound between us as I tried to make sense of the night before. I told him there had to be a logical explanation, that we couldn't just ignore what had happened. He agreed, but he seemed uncertain. He said there was little he could do, and that he was actually considering boarding up the room. Boarding it up. The thought sent a chill through me. It was as though he wasn't just trying to keep people out, but something else in. I wasn't ready to give up on reason just yet. Boarding up a room seemed absurd. There had to be another explanation. I told the captain maybe it wasn't a haunting at all. Maybe it was a stowaway. Someone trying to frighten passengers away from that cabin so he could live there in comfort. A madman, perhaps, but still flesh and blood. The captain's expression changed. He said that idea had never occurred to him, that I might be right. Then he leaned in closer and said, "I tell you what." That evening, the captain finally agreed to stand watch with me. He promised that if the intruder dared to appear, we would face him together. There was a flicker of relief inside me, a strange comfort in knowing I wouldn't be alone in that cursed stateroom again. The captain wasn't like his crew. He didn't tremble at ghost stories or whisper about bad luck. He was a man of reason. As we spoke, I could hear the faint rumble of the ship's engines beneath the floor, a deep, steady growl that never stopped. The walls creaked softly as the waves pressed against the hull. Every sound reminded me that we were miles from land, surrounded by nothing but the Black Sea. The captain gave a half smile, and for a brief moment, the fear I'd carried since the night before felt lighter. Still, somewhere beyond that porthole, I thought I could hear the wind moaning, like something calling from far out on the water. I felt a strange relief knowing I wouldn't be alone again that night. The captain had agreed to join me in Stateroom 13. Together, perhaps, we'd uncover the truth behind this cursed cabin. The ship moved steadily across the darkening sea, its engines humming like a restless heartbeat beneath my feet. From the deck, I watched the waves glint in the dying sunlight, the sky bleeding red as the day surrendered to night. "See you at 10. the captain had said. "Stateroom 13, I'd replied, but as I turned toward the corridor, a chill wind swept past me, colder than before. It carried with it the faint smell of seaweed and decay. A warning, perhaps, or an invitation. The day dragged on, heavy with unease. Every faint rattle of the ship felt louder than before, metal grinding against metal, echoing through the long, narrow corridors. By evening, even the hum of the engines beneath my feet sounded like a warning, a low growl rising from the deep. When the clock struck 10, I forced myself below deck. Each step down the stairwell creaked beneath my shoes, the hollow sound swallowed by the damp air. The faint vibration of the ship pulsed through the steel walls like a heartbeat, steady but uneasy. At the end of the passage, the captain was waiting. His figure stood against the pale glow of a single flickering light, his coat still wet with sea mist. "Right on time," I said, my voice cracking slightly as I tried to sound calm. "Let's go in," he replied, and together we turned toward the door to Stateroom 13. The hinges groaned as we pushed it open, slow and heavy, like the sound of a coffin lid scraping across stone. The stale air rolled out in a cold breath, thick with the scent of salt and decay. I hesitated for only a moment, then stepped inside. The porthole gleamed faintly in the dim light, the smell of sea salt still clinging to the air. You and the captain checked it carefully, testing the bolts, listening to the metallic click as each one locked into place. The faint hum of the ship's engines pulsed through the steel floor, steady, almost reassuring. You sat on the edge of the berth, the mattress creaking beneath you, while the captain lowered himself onto a small valise beside the door. For a moment, there was only silence, broken now and then by the soft sigh of waves brushing against the hull outside. "Good," the captain murmured quietly, his voice rough like gravel under strain. "Now, let's turn out the light." As the bulb dimmed and finally died with a faint pop, darkness swallowed the room. You could still hear the faint groan of the ship's frame shifting in the water, wood and metal complaining softly in the night. The air grew heavy, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. The room is shrouded in darkness now. Only the low, steady hum of the ship's engines can be heard far below deck, like a deep metallic heartbeat echoing through the hull. Outside, the muffled roar of the sea rises and falls, heavy and distant, the kind of sound that presses against the walls, whispering through every rivet. Then, suddenly, there's a sharp creak, metal bending, a hiss of air. The porthole, bolted tight just minutes before, swings open on its own. A faint draft seeps in, cool and wet, carrying the unmistakable stench of seawater and something far worse, decay. The ship's engines keep rumbling, unaware, as something unseen brushes past the curtains. You lunge toward the porthole, heart pounding, the echo of the waves outside mixing with the deep, trembling hum of the ship's engines. As you grab the cold metal frame, a sudden resistance pushes back, as if something alive is forcing it open from the other side. Your fingers strain, the bolts grind and shriek, scratch, the sound slicing through the dark. You can hear the captain behind you, his breath quick, uneven, and then a low rumble fills the cabin, like pressure building in the walls themselves. And then his voice breaks into a scream, a guttural human sound filled with pure, unfiltered terror. The air grows thick. You can smell it now, that same fetid stench of sea rot and decay, pouring into the room as if the ocean itself were alive and angry. Something unseen presses against the porthole one last time. Thud, and then silence. The only thing left is the captain's trembling gasp in the darkness. You spin around, heart pounding, and there it is. The same dripping, shapeless horror from the night before, rising slowly from the upper berth. Its body glistens under the dim cabin light, slick with seawater and decay. A wet, slapping sound echoes with every movement. Schluck, schluck, as if the ocean itself were trying to crawl inside. The captain's face goes pale, his breath ragged, choking on fear. His voice trembles, but you can barely make out his words through the rising panic in the room. He backs away toward the porthole, eyes wide, the sound of his boots scraping the metal floor. Skrk, skrk. The stench of salt and death fills your lungs. You can hear the waves slamming against the hull outside. Whoosh! Thud! Each impact shaking the ship like a heartbeat. The creature's hand reaches out, dripping, bloated, a human shape turned monstrous. And in that moment, you understand. Whatever this thing is, it shouldn't be walking the earth. Not anymore. The captain staggers backward, his voice breaking under the weight of guilt and terror. His words come out as a desperate confession. He gasps, I killed you, right there, in that berth. His voice trembles as the truth spills out, the sound of his breath ragged and shallow. You were dead. I pushed you through that porthole into the sea. The air grows colder. The creature stands before him, silent and dripping, the sound of water pattering against the metal floor. Plip, plip, plip. It moves closer, its outline barely human now, skin swollen and gray, seaweed clinging like the tatters of a shroud. The captain's words die in his throat. You can't be. You can't. The room fills with the low groan of the ship's hull under pressure. Creak. And somewhere far below, the deep ocean seems to answer, a distant, hollow rumble. The man who once commanded this vessel now stands frozen before the ghost of his own sin. The captain's body collapses to the floor, his face pale, his lips frozen in a silent scream. You stumble backward, your heart pounding so loud it drowns out the deep rumble of the ship's engines. Before your eyes, the swollen gray creature turns slowly toward the porthole. Water drips from its arms, pattering against the metal floor. Plip, plip, plip. It pauses, as if looking back one last time. Then, with a sudden surge of motion, it hurls itself through the open porthole, splashing into the black sea below with a sound like thunder striking the water. You gasp, staring at the swirling foam outside. The wind howls, and the room falls still again. The cabin is heavy with silence. Only the low thrum of the ship's engines pulses beneath your feet like a dull heartbeat. You stare at the captain's body, his skin ashen and lifeless, eyes frozen wide in terror. The air tastes of rust and salt, thick and sour. You swallow hard, forcing your gaze toward the porthole. A faint dripping sound echoes, tiny splashes of seawater hitting the floorboards. You can hear the ship's hull groaning softly, the deep moan of metal under strain. Your breath quickens. The porthole, the one that thing went through. It's no longer open. It's closed, bolted. The hinges creak, a dry metallic whisper, though no one's touched them. Droplets slide down the glass like cold sweat. The curtains sway gently, though there's no wind. Your voice trembles as you murmur, "Good Lord." The ship hums on, and somewhere deep within the steel, there's a soft echo, a hollow tap, like knuckles against metal, fading slowly into the sea. A low chuckle breaks the silence, rough and hollow, echoing like laughter from the grave. Hey, hey, and that's the story, dear listener. The narrator's voice carries the weight of the sea itself, slow, mocking, and cold. The captain received the shock of his life, eh? Well, he should have known better. You can't get away with murder, not at sea. A faint creak of the ship's hull lingers beneath the words, a reminder that the ocean never forgets. On your own ship, the voice drawls, letting the words drag like chains across the deck. Oh, by the way, the tone softens into a whisper, the kind that crawls beneath your skin. If you ever really sail aboard the Ocean Queen, ask for Stateroom 13. There's a pause, then a wet, rasping grin in the darkness. Tell 'em I sent you. A faint echo of the sea answers, like distant laughter swallowed by the waves.